All right, here we go. This is Chris Rubio of Rubio Long Snapping. I'm out here in northern Idaho. I'm with the famous Dr. Conor Hogan, 4,000 plus miles away in Ireland. I cannot pronounce the city. I cannot really pronounce the job that he has. You guys know that we had an interesting first meeting. We kind of worked well together. I said, let's talk over some topics like nervousness, courageousness, fear, all that good stuff, because I think I can give the quote unquote audience my version of what's happening and why it's happening. And then doctor, you can give the actual real version of, and kind of maybe help us figure out how to stop it from becoming a train wreck. So Doc, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Well, first off, I'm in Galway in Ireland, west coast of Ireland, 500 meters from the Atlantic Ocean. Next stop, New York City. So not too far away, maybe, after it all. So the field I'm in is Neuro Socio. It is a tongue twister. Neuro Social Psychology. So basically, there's neurology going on there, which is tied in with your brain, obviously, and the social impact of psychology, and obviously all the psychological stuff. And if you're in a team like you guys are, it's really, really important to be integrated in that social way. But of course, today we're talking about long snapping and nervousness. Or what exactly are we talking about, Chris?
Well, a long snapper to me is the hardest position. I always say it's the hardest position because we only have so many times that we're out there. I mean, in an average game, a long snapper can have, say, 5 snaps, or they can have 15. Where a running back, linebacker, they can have, 80, 90 times they touch the ball, or they're, involved in a play. So if they have a screw up, they can just, oh, don't worry, 30 more seconds and I'm going to be back on the field. I'm ready to roll. Whereas a long snapper, you mess up, automatically the camera's on you. Everyone's Googling your name. I can't believe you messed this up. And it's such a weird thing. I always say a long snapper is kind of like a sniper. You have to be absolutely perfect every single time. And no one should ever know your name. That's exactly what I want.
Well, I'm glad we're actually so far away from each other. Sniper, I'm not looking for a sniper here.
All right. So I want to talk about nervousness, because I think if I start to tell you my first snap story, it might open up every single thing. So some of you have heard this before, some of you have not. My first snap was basically this. I was a redshirt freshman. I was second string, kind of third stringish, and they say, okay, Rubio, what am I, 19 years old, maybe 20, and they said, Rubio, you're going to travel to Cal Berkeley this year. Okay, this week, excuse me. So I go up to Cal and I'm having a great time. It's like the first time I've been on a plane in a long time. I think since I was like 14. Yeah, regardless, doesn't matter. I get on the plane, I'm having fun. I get to the, eating the Haagen-Dazs ice cream bars, all that good stuff. Stay in a nice hotel, get to the field, having a great time, looking at the cheerleaders, looking at the crowd. Yay, we win. Didn't even think about it, did not get in. I was easy breezy. I said I get home that night, my roommates go, Rubio, how was it? So it was cool, man. I got to travel around, got a nice hotel, got some good food. And they said, were you nervous? I said, oh, was it nervous? Why would I be nervous? I wasn't playing. And they said, Rubio, if the first string dude gets hurt, you're going in. And immediately I was like, whoo. My heart started pounding. I remember getting sweaty, like, oh, good God. And I'm thinking, what's this all about? So right then I immediately start getting nervous. Is there anything, like right now, is anything sparking for you, doctor? Like
I mean, I suppose first of all, before we kind of get into that, what is like nervousness is, it's a big word. It's not really a word we use, regularly, but really and truly it's kind of stress, and stress was, if we go back and kind of link stress, the word stress, it was kind of coined back, believe it or not, around 1936. So it was linked really to what is essentially uncertainty and how we feel uncertainty in our minds. And that's a psychological kind of basis of feeling, when we feel uncertain in any regard. And if we look at COVID-19, there's a lot of uncertainties around it. So obviously other aspects of our life we're going to be very nervous about with regard to getting out there, standing beside people and so on. Like the feelings of nervousness can stop the blood supply to our hands. And I think that's really, really important to know that. But, obviously anything with sport is to do with our hands or feet for sure. Now the blood supply or poor blood supply, this can affect the areas that our nerves are, when our nerves are trying to feel. And we have to have proper nerve force in order to actually just justify the actions of our practice. So whatever we're doing in practice, in whatever sport, we have to have the nerve supply supplied by blood and essentially going from the brain to what's called the autonomic nervous system. And they're all linked in, the autonomic nervous system, through our brain, through the nervous system, with all our organs. So you mentioned right there, your heart started beating. This is the first physical symptom that you felt when you kind of felt this, what you described there as shock as such. So straight away you're hearing something, it's cognitively going around, bouncing around in your brain and going through all these different systems. And then physically you feel it in your heart. And we mentioned our hands there a moment ago, and I'm sure you're going to go to town on all the physical aspects of.
Well, yeah, because as a long snapper, I kind of need my hands. I mean, so you're saying it affects the blood flow. I mean, as soon as I feel like I'm nervous, should I do this? Should I shake my hands? Should I do jazz hands? What do I do here?
Well, you see, that's the thing. That's like, look, there's a million different parts of the brain, and the brain science that's coming out in the last 20 or so years has just been just wonderful. I mean, the 1990s was coined the decade of just essentially, you know, almost like, you know, finding a vaccine. It was just, there was so much that came out of that decade alone. So the last 20 or 30 years, we just found out so much. But essentially, what is really important with the likes of, I presume, long snapping is that, you know, it's a short, sharp, hence the word snap, type of action. And like you say, it's over, it comes and it goes, and it's very infrequent. But when you're shocked into something like that, it's going to trigger those things, those symptoms of your heart beating. It could be your hands, you could be sweating, you could get confusion. But the more you've practiced, you're also working on other areas of your brain. So that's how you can offset the actual feelings of, you know, like just exactly how you described, young player not mentally ready to start because, you know, you didn't think it was going to happen right now, maybe a few months down the line or whatever. And suddenly there's this shock and nervousness, and then all these symptoms. But to allay those fears, to kind of cool them down, to soothe them, your mind, you need to bring your mind back to all the work you've done, why you are actually here in the first place, why you're selected, you know, to be a replacement if you didn't think you were going to be playing. I mean, if you're on a team bus and if you're in the mix, if you've got through you'll know the numbers, not me, but, you know, if you're up there and you're getting up towards collegiate level or NFL or whatever, you have talent. If you have put in the work, you have to kind of concentrate on those things psychologically so that you can allay those fears of physical symptoms of the heart beating, hands sweating, and so on.
So you almost have to you have to acknowledge, okay, I'm nervous. This is completely normal, but I should be nervous because it's the first time I'm doing it, but I should also be kind of calm because I've done it a billion times. And that's what I always tell my long snappers. And so getting in that mode where, hey, I deserve a spot on this bus. Obviously the coaches know what they're doing. That's why they usually have to try to throw it back up, you know, kind of, and just get them ease in. And that's what happened. I needed to expedite my self-confidence level. So that whole next week, I'm listening to my roommates like, oh, dude, you should have been so nervous. So I'm practicing over and over and over. And then finally, next week we get to Arizona State and they bring me travel again. And my heart is going right out of the gate because I'm thinking, oh gosh, the starter is going to step on a sprinkler. He's going to blow his knee out. Rubio, you're going in. Oh, what the hell's happening? And we end up jumping out to a huge lead right out of the gate. And the coach does the worst thing possible for me because I'm a smart kid. And he goes, Rubio, this keeps up, you're going in. And I remember going, oh, good God, here it goes. And we're at Scottsdale, Arizona. It's September. It's like 120 degrees. I'm dripping sweat. I must have taken literally 100 to 200 practice snaps. Halftime, we're at 42-0. Rubio, if this keeps up, you're going in. And I'm just dripping sweat. I mean, my pants and shirt are a whole different color. Finally, fourth quarter, we're up big. He goes, Rubio, you're going in, you're going in. And I get out there, and like you said, I could feel my heart going through the pads. I remember literally looking down and feeling it and hearing it, like when you can hear your heart in your head. I don't know if that makes sense, but I was just like, doo-doom, doo-doom. And there was only maybe 2,000 people in the stadium. It held 70,000, so you could hear people talking, which made it even worse because you can hear everyone, hey, go get me some nachos, get me a beer, do it. And I remember, this is the whole muscle memory part. I get down to snap the ball. And I hold the ball like this. And I remember putting my hand like this. And I couldn't remember if my ring finger went like this on the seam or over. And so I remember getting down there and I kept moving it because nothing felt right. And it must have been 7, 8 hours, probably 4 to 5 seconds. And I remember the guy across from me, and I'm sure you're going to talk about this, gave me the best advice at all. He says, just snap the ball, you dumb. And he starts cussing me out. And out loud, I literally said this. I go, okay, boom, and I snapped it and it was perfect. But he gave me the best advice ever of basically don't think, just snap the damn ball. So, okay, now you break down what I was experiencing there, because I know you've got some sort of brain answer.
Yeah, so basically your experience right there was, obviously the story and the experience is quite unique, but at the same time, this is what can happen to any up and coming player who's looking for that first start, that first appearance. You've got to be ready, right? So when your body, you mentioned there that you felt your heart pounding, and you felt it in your head and so on, but everybody feels it differently. So it doesn't necessarily have to be your heart. I can even remember before I even got into any qualifications role of what I'm doing here, even hearing phrases like my heart was in my mouth, that kind of thing. I was thinking, I don't feel like that. Others do. Why do they feel like that? And the reality is we don't all individually feel the same way. Our bodies and all our muscles, you mentioned muscle memory there, we're all, there's so many cells in our bodies, even though there's, for example, the same physicality and physical actions for each individual athlete used in long snapping, the cellular kind of components that are leading from the brain right down to where those muscles are and those muscles memory there's a different trace going on with each individual. So you might actually feel it in your heart, whereas other people might actually have digestion issues. Once they were told a few hours earlier that you're going in or whatever, they might start actually getting problems with their stomach. They might actually feel, well, I shouldn't have eaten that, or that was the best thing to eat, and suddenly
not to cut you off, is that like sometimes you hear people say, I get weak in the knees?
Exactly. So all those old phrases, my heart was in my hands, weak
sweaty
at my
palms,
knees.
they start get hot
Yeah,
sweats, things like that.
I could feel in my gut, sweaty palms. Exactly. So everybody feels it differently. So in the case there of, your finger was twitching, again, there's a neural kind of links there, obviously, to our fingers from our brain. But again, somebody might have interrupted. It's like an electrical system where if you have several light switches in a house coming off the same fuse, that if it depends on the ways it was wired, we're all wired differently. So even though it's going down through the same fuse line, it's all wired differently. There's a thing called fight or flight, and it's ancient from prehistoric days when we were all apes as such. And essentially that's all about how we actually fight a shock action, like Rubio, you're going in, get ready kind of thing. Or do we flight? Do we run away from it? So are we going to try and, take control of our minds and start going back to how much I've practiced or how much I've been prepared in my coaching? How am I going to respond really? Because it's an acute, going back to what it is, this whole nervousness, it's an acute stress response. So this fight or flight is actually going to kind of put us one way or the other. And that's essentially, sorting the boys from the men. So we're going to find out who the real good player is.
Okay, now is this possible that okay, so we both have a pressure situation. You're 4,000 miles away, I'm in the middle of nowhere. In my head I have you kind of living in the middle of nowhere. I haven't seen outside your house, but I just got this vision. I'm thinking Ireland, green fields and all that good stuff, on like a sheep or something going by, things like that. I have no idea, whatever, doesn't matter. So if you and I both get into, quote, a nervous situation, would where we live and how we are raised skew how we get nervous?
Absolutely. Say, for example, the example you've just given there, if you're given time, and you weren't given much time right there, you were given very little time to mentally prepare. Going back to what you said earlier on, that the chap, the player or whatever, who was probably more experienced, and he's just saying, shut up, just concentrate and do what you need to do. Although it worked for you, but it's not the ideal way in general to be kind of shouting at somebody and, physically kind of, just pushing them to do something. The action of doing it and just not thinking is ideal, because essentially you've only milliseconds to perform the action. Otherwise you've got a whole team of players on top of you and the play is gone or whatever. So, but it's the way that was transferred by that person, that other player, was not ideal. But perhaps what's happening for you in that case was that, and proof is in the pudding for you now, because you're teaching everybody, you're coaching everybody years later, because you knew the action. you had done the work, and that's also the ability that you had. So it's a trade-off between those two things, but also exactly with what you've just said. The people around you is really, really important. Parenting is hugely important. You know, there's like research out there with regard to how a parent actually feels and cares for somebody, and then how a team player goes in, or an athlete goes into performance. This can rub off on the actual performance and through the player. So even though the player is prepared well by a coach, or prepared well in practice, or they have the skills or whatever, the parents' actual feeling and their closeness actually can be a bad thing to them, because
Okay.
actually,
No, this is a perfect spot here, because you and I discussed this a little bit about mommy daddy issues, daddy mommy issues, cutting the cord. I want to do this. Okay. I want to save that for our next one, because I think we're just about to go down. We're going to throttle up, but we're going to get going, because I can bring up a billion examples, and I know parents are going to want to hear more of, okay, so the dude gets nervous. My kid gets nervous. I know he does. He's about to piss his pants. How do I fix it? And so can we say, like, the next one, we're going to talk about that?
yeah, absolutely. I think it's great. I think because it's a perfect thing. I think you know, a couple of parents, it'd be wonderful to hear or see them, get their questions, whatever, eventually. Um, and I mean, it's one relationship, you know, that we all hopefully have. Certainly, if you're a young player, you're going to have that's your first known relationship. It's the most natural relationship. Naturally enough, the person cares, the parent cares. So it's about putting that care into your performance for a better outcome, rather than hindering them in the performance. That's what we're essentially, and that's what a parent wants. They want them to do well, don't they?
Perfect. Doctor, this was fantastic. This was my hands actually got sweaty when you were talking about it. So I know you obviously know what you're talking about. We're going to make sure we're going to pump this out on social media. We will come back and do this again. Maybe we'll even get some parents on as well to kind of feed some questions. I'll start to put it out on social media and see what we think. This was episode number 1 with myself, Chris Rubio of Rubio Long Snapping, Dr. Conor Hogan out there in where, Ireland?
Galway, the west coast of Ireland, the Wild West.
500 meters away from the Atlantic Ocean.
Yep.
And then a
We're
nice
ready for you.
flight to New York. Doc, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Chris. Talk soon.